Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Rosenberg. I'm the manager of engineering operations at Arity, which is a division of Allstate that focuses on driving insights and helping to modify the ecosystem of our transportation, where our goal is to make transportation safer, smarter, and more useful for everyone. There are about 400 of us in Arity who are focused on improving the way people drive, improving the way we measure how people drive, and a good number of data scientists, engineers, and marketing folks, and all professions in between. And what I wanted to share with you today is a little bit of our journey from coming from out of the Allstate data centers and into the Amazon cloud. In a sense, it was a classic lift and shift. And everybody who's come from the big data centers, it's the annual budget cycles. And I won't surprise you when I tell you it took us 6 months to procure and manage and deploy servers in the data center space. You know, when we talk about the cloud, we're talking minutes. And when we come back from the way we used to do things, it was months. The architecture was designed to always be on 7/24/365. Operations operated around the clock. Your resources are selected for you by the architects, and then you have to work with what you have to work with. There really isn't a lot of give when it came to that. And we were one of the first groups inside of Allstate to embark on the cloud journey. So of course, what do? We hire consultants who know more than us. And that leads to some interesting things, because we don't know what we don't know. And when your consultants don't know, and you don't know enough to know that they don't know, I'll say hilarity ensues would be the way I'd describe it. They made some very interesting decisions for us, and we didn't know enough to ask the right questions to go along, because we were just at the point of dipping our toes into our AWS cloud journey, having come, again, from the on-prem world. I'm going to point out a bunch of things, and you're going to say, really? That actually happened? And it's probably very similar to what happens in a lot of places that do a lift and shift. I was mentioning to one of the folks in the room here earlier that one of our Amazon account managers told us 1 in 5 AWS implementations fail due to blowing out the budget and not planning, and you spun up things that you didn't understand what the cost implications were, and then the CFO gets that bill and says, seriously, that's not what I approved. And they pull the plug and they play it safe. And so I came into the picture about 18 months after we began our cloud journey. I've got a background in computer science. I went to school later, got an MBA in accounting and finance. And one of the key things that I believe helps me be successful is I can translate between the guys who talk in bits and bytes and the people who talk in debits and credits. And it is a huge problem. I'll give you an example. When the accounting person was wondering why the storage bill was so large, it's almost 4 times bigger than it should be. That's not what you provisioned. Well, it finally, after about a day of arguing and fighting and all that good stuff that goes along with it, we found out that the accounting folks don't understand what replication factors are in Hadoop. So when we tell you we have this much usable data, we actually have 3x that because of the replication factor and another 0.6 because of the overhead. So part of the struggle is getting a common language, because when I talk to an architect and they talk in terms of data, they're talking in terms of the first copy of the data. So when we have a 5 terabyte node, there's actually 20 terabytes provisioned, 3x for the replication, about 0.6, 0.7 for the overhead. So when the accountants are trying to reconcile with the architects what the heck's going on, there's a total mismatch. And if you think about it as a Venn diagram between accounting and technology, I try to live in that cross-section of that overlap and then help these folks work and play well with each other, because one group holds the purse strings and the other are the folks who are implementing your successful strategies to make money, and you've got to get them working and playing well together. And a lot of what I had to go through was more behavioral than technical to get things moving forward on a good basis. So first, I had to start with working with the developers and the architects. If it's up and it's running and my SLAs are met and things are operating as they should, it's all good. Costs are something management worries about, not the architects, not the developers. And had to basically take the position of we've got to teach the architects accounting just a little bit, and we got to teach the accountants a little bit of architecture. Again, just a little bit. Your best friend is the AWS Cloud Practitioner course. I put into the curriculum for all the accounting team in our division that they had to complete this course, not take the test, but at least do the 7 hours of video in this year. And I worked with the director of finance to get that so they can at least start speaking that same language. When somebody, it's a whole world of 3-letter acronyms in Amazon. And when the architects and the developers are talking in those 3-letter acronyms, outside of that world, it makes no sense. And we've got to break down that barrier. And when we didn't grow up in the cloud, because again, we're a lift and shift operation out of the 2 data centers Allstate operates. There's no turning the lights off when you leave the room. Always up means it's good because it's running as it should. Horizontal scaling's non-existent. You build for peak. You're given the provisions in space and in CPU horsepower that you're given, and you have to work within those constraints. It's fixed in the classic sense. It's just simply a fixed cost. And in the Amazon world, I'm going to steal shamelessly from Einstein on that second line there, who said, make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. Make your architecture as small, but no smaller. And that is, a key to managing your costs. And getting people to shift from these big monolithic structures into these modules that are only up for just as long as you need them is, we call it turning the crank. It requires several turns of the crank. And I'm going to take you through the steps that we've completed and where we're at currently and the things we have planned coming down the road. And feel free, if you want to ask questions while this is going on, please, I want to make this interactive and flexible for you guys. That's where the big benefit is. So I spent time with the technical teams, teaching them basic accounting. What is a fixed cost versus a variable cost? And having them shift from, I needed this much horsepower to do my project, to I need to get this work done. What's the best way to get the work done? And introduce the concept of how can I do it at the least cost? Because I love it, because you can tell probably by my hair pattern here, I've been around this for a little bit, and those of us who've been around a long time remember back in the day, cycles mattered, memory mattered. You had to be hyper efficient with the CPU cycles you ran and the memory you consumed, because you had to swap out your stuff so the next job could run. I see a few head nods back in there. I love it because it's all over again. This has come back. The same things matter in 70s programming and early 80s programming matter in the cloud now. I don't care if your solution is efficient. If it takes longer to run, you have some fancy, cool recursive routine that gets the job done, but it takes 5 minutes to run, and somebody who writes this really ugly, simple linear code that takes 90 seconds to run, guess whose job goes to production if it's doing the same workload? Because cost matter, minutes matter, seconds matter. And we have a phrase, we say, scale happens. Part of educating people, as I talk in terms of 2 different types of language, we operate a Cassandra data store for our operational database. It costs 0.2 cents a month to have one of our connections in there. And again, we're driving insights, so a connection is somebody using our app on the phone or the OBD2 device that you plug into the port into your car. We consider those connections. That is, I'll touch on that a little more in a moment. And I teach them fractions of a cent matter, less than pocket change, to keep the data for a customer for a month in our operational data store. But in about 10 to 12 days, those fractions of a cent add up to more than that we pay that developer in a year. And always talk in terms of those 2 things so they understand scale. So when I talk about our storage costs this much per connection, or our EC2 costs, I always give them, when I give them operational reports, it's this much per connection. And that's the thing I wrote at the bottom. Find a meaningful denominator that matters to your company. In our company, it's connections. It may be orders, it may be revenue per employee, but give everybody, build that common language, create that common language for them. So regardless of what your business is, if it's order lines, how much does it cost to process an order line through your system? Our universe is entirely built upon those connections, and I couch everything with connections as my denominator. I normalize all my numbers to that, so everybody can now start speaking the same language. And then also learn the fractions, because it costs us, and it's part of our secret sauce I can't say, it's this much to cost for fully loaded AWS cost. It cost us X amount per connection per month. This much of it was EC2, this much of it was storage, this much of it was VPC, on and on and on for all the services that we use. So as we add features and functions and the costs go up, I start asking questions. First question I ask is, are you fixing something? If you're fixing something and the costs go up because of it, okay, we patched an error, we made a mistake, it costs more. Is it related to security? We deal in driving data. We take that really, really seriously. Your GPS points are considered restricted data points in our universe. And as such, they're always kept encrypted. And we really want to take good care and be good stewards of that data. So we really take a lot of time and a lot of effort to understand what are the cost drivers and how those all move. And we measure everything in denominators. We took in this much data, and on a per connection basis, our driver spent this many minutes driving, this many miles driving, so everything is per connection. And get everybody talking that common language. That's hugely important to not only just getting the accountants working and playing well with the tech folks, but now the marketing people understand, and the sales folks understand, and all that good stuff. And as I was saying before, if it's security related, if it's a bug fix, if it's a regulatory requirement like GDPR, because we operate in Europe, and the costs go up on a per connection basis, I can understand that, and that's explainable. If you're just deploying new code because you're supposedly improving something and the costs go up, that raises the red flags. And then we start digging deeper and we start asking the why questions. What did you do? Why did you do it? Are we laying the groundwork for future features, options, and functions? That's fine, because we're expecting future revenue coming off that increase in cost. If you just did something different because you wanted to try something out and the costs go up, we're going to roll your code back. Thank you for trying, but part of the picture now that we're out of the fixed cost universe is the cost matters. So again, we have to break the developers of the fixed cost mindset. I went the wrong way. The other thing is you have to teach the accountants that the rules have changed. A little bit of a story. We had our data lake folks spin up 19 servers to provision new storage. And then I was working with the director of finance and I was explaining to him why the bill went up. And oh dear God, it was like, I didn't give anybody permission to turn up 19 servers. I saw no paperwork. I didn't sign off on anything. I saw no cost projections. Shut it down. It's like a timeout. It doesn't work like that anymore. So it took a good amount of time to sit down one-on-one with the finance team for several hours and walk them through how Amazon works. Again, coach them to take the cloud practitioner class. Teach them that as fast as he spun up 19 servers for our data lake, you can take them down. And he doesn't have to ask for your permission anymore. That was the hardest one. We came from a command and control structure inside an old line business that's been around 85, 86 years. And the people who came up in that system learned from those who taught them. And we're the first departure from that fixed cost universe where you, the developers, have the ability to put something up in production and you can blow out the costs, or you can, manage things. And it doesn't require procurement's permission anymore. It doesn't require finance to sign off on it anymore. It requires the architecture team to plan and whatnot. And one of the gaps we found is they were not informing finance of what's coming. So we find gaps, we close gaps. And that is huge in getting things, getting people to work and play well together, because our director of finance took it like, I don't want to say personally, but he was like, we don't operate that way. And it's like, no, this is the new world of flexibility, flexible services, flexible operations. Use what you need, turn it off, and then use it again when you need it again, whenever that may be. And there's no POs, no requisitions, all that good stuff goes away. So we work within budgets, and what they do, as long as they stay within the budget, it's all good. And then everybody wants granular cost breakouts, tagging. Tagging, if I had to do it all over again, I would have a good tagging taxonomy and a good tagging hierarchy before allowing anybody to write their first script. Now, as you all know, you can't tag everything in Amazon, and that gets to be its own problem. But what you can tag, you do want to tag, you want to be very thoughtful in laying out your tags, and you're going to see some examples coming up here in some future slides on how we did tagging. And actually, we're in our third iteration of tags because we're building a really nice hierarchy around them so we can get down to a node level. I can tell if your node behaved differently day over day based upon its cost that it's generating. And we're really happy about that we can get that granular. The finance folks don't care about it, but it helps us in operations side of the house measure, monitor, and assess the health of our systems and look for anomalies. Understanding the cost usage report. I don't know if anybody has gone through every frickin' column in the cost usage report. We generate, 4 or 5 million lines a day. I watched a webinar from at AWS reInvent. The folks from Intuit gave a presentation. They generate 4 billion lines of cur a day. It's absolutely astounding. And if you've ever had to try to back them in and allocate all those costs, it's a real pain in the rear end. It's very detailed. A lot of it you don't need, some of it you do, and some things you do need just aren't present. And you have to, if you're going to use the cur as a driver, work with your technical account manager and help them walk you through it line by line and reconcile it back, because if you've worked with the accountants, everything's got to tie back to the bill. Cost Explorer and Trusted Advisor, live them, know them, learn them. There's also all kind of third-party software out there. We did not go that route. We wanted to roll our own, and one of the reasons we wanted to roll our own is you can't get intimate with the understanding of how the architecture works, what are the cost drivers. I can say, pick your favorite vendor, Cloud Health, Cloudability, Apptio, what have you. Well, it told me this. What does that mean? I don't know what told me this. I want to be able to talk at a granular level of how the EC2 moved. EC2 moved day over day, the elastic block storage, the VPC, how things move day over day. And that's why we decided to go on the path to do our own. And I'll touch on a little bit more of that later. One of the things we're trying to do, though, architecturally, is we're trying to be cloud agnostic. So we use mostly EC2, EBS, and S3. That's almost 85% of our costs sit in those three buckets. And you may think, why do you want to be cloud agnostic? I came from a company that is very risk averse, and they really think, oh, this is nice. We're going to Amazon. Well, it's a big change from the data centers. It does represent risks. What if Amazon leads us down for 3 or 4 years and then cranks the price on us? What if Google does the same thing? What if Azure, or what if Verizon, all the other providers out there do the same thing? So we decided to be as cloud agnostic as possible. And I'll touch upon that on a later slide as to where we think that's going to be a competitive advantage later on down the line. And again, to go off of, to use a AWS specific capability like a Lambda, you need permission to do that. We want to know why you're doing it, because we know that if we ever have to lift and shift out of Amazon for whatever reason, we want to know where those idiosyncratic technology points are, and we keep an inventory of them so we know all the things we've got to touch before we move forward. And again, we decided to roll our own because we wanted mastery of it. When I met with the various vendors, they wanted a percentage of your savings as a fee, somewhere between 2 and 3%, which they all say is negotiable. I came up implementing manufacturing software and the old BPIX, APIX, all that good stuff on the IBM AS400 series way back when. And I learned a lot about gross margins and costs and cost management. And I'll tell you this, I'm not giving up gross margin points to anybody, not even my mom. And because they want 2 or 3 points of the savings. So that's 2 or 3 points of gross margin. That's a tough sell at our scale because our bills are substantial. And I made the decision to hire a credit analyst from an investment bank and teach him the technology. He had all the skills required to crank out the spreadsheets, make some awesome models that we put together to assess the cost of future projects. And teaching that person the technology, to me, was an easier path. I can do it for less total cost, and I could probably hire 2 more people and still come in under the cost of what it would take of what was proposed to me by some of those third-party vendors. So, thus the journey begins. If you guys grew up in the cloud, if you're an infrastructure expert, you're gonna look at us and go, what the heck were you guys thinking? Well, we came from the place we came from because we got good advice or didn't get good advice, and we came from the structure, and the journey is what the journey is in all intents and for all intents and purposes. We identified first what has to run 7/24/365. Again, our world is driving insights, people drive around the clock. Period, end of story. So we identified that, and we bought convertible reserved instances against that. Why did we buy CRIs? Because we're new at this game. We've only been at this a couple of years. And in a lift and shift, you can't start out the way you want to, so we don't know 100% what the path forward looks like. So we turn the crank, we reassess, we turn the crank, we reassess, build, grow, change, what have you. So we buy CRIs and we give up those points of savings that you would get if you did a standard RI. And whether they're paid up front or pay as you go, whichever flavor you want to do, we chose to mitigate the locking in on technology by always sticking with CRIs. The bottom line is one of those things you get from the institutional structure we came from. It took me more time to convince corporate accounting how a CRI worked and to get them to set up the books in SAP and to give us a new account number and create a new GL number for it than anything else in the entire process, because we could just dash off a note to our technical account manager and say, get this many, we want to cover these M4 extra larges, and we want to do 3-year paid upfront CRIs on them. So working with the folks who've never encountered this before, even though we have an entire tech finance department, it was an educational experience. So now we learn that when we're going to do something new and interesting that involves a prepaid asset, make the trip to Northbrook from down here at the Merchandise Mart, and we go talk to the accounting folks, let them know what's coming, let them know how it works. Because the worst thing you can do is make the folks who hold the pocketbook feel stupid or silly. So take that time, work with them, and help them understand the process. I've gone up to Northbrook a couple of times and sat down with the folks in finance and just taken them through this entire process, our cloud journey, where we're coming from, where we're going, and what are the cost drivers. But doing it in the language they understand, in debits and credits and prepaid assets and what have you. Then we bought a lot more CRIs, and then it was time to shift over. Let's talk to the architects, let's talk to the engineers, help them understand, one, what are CRIs, because they just build stuff and it works. They're not typically trained in our world to worry about the cost of things. So we wanted to get them to understand what a reserved instance is, how it operates. I think between RIs, CRIs, you can do some timed reserved instances, and then the various 3 different ways you can pay for everything. There's several options, and we wanted to make sure they understood every single option, what were the trigger points, and how they can impact in making that more useful for us. So, and then it was on me and my team sitting in the middle. We had to go out and learn what each technology stack did, how it operated, what were its goals and purposes, what kind of workloads are running on those stacks, and just dig into the details of how those guys operate. So then we can plan what cost savings measures we need to implement going forward. Like I said before, we had some awesome consultants come in, so we had massive amounts of EBS provisioned, very little of it used. The number of red lines you saw in Trusted Advisor early on in our implementation was quite spectacular in single-digit use of utilization for CPUs, EBS dramatically over-provisioned, and followed by 6-figure numbers. And that was, that's what I walked into, and that's what I'm working with my team to help clean up. We profiled all the CPU utilization for every single stack and every single processor, put CloudWatch metrics on stuff, and all that while we're operating a business with competing priorities and all the other stuff everyone in this room has to work with and deal with day in and day out. It's just the nature of the beast. As I like to say, we're not only steering an aircraft carrier into a different direction, we're dismantling it, turning it into battleships, corvettes, and frigates, because monolith is the way of the past, and all these little pieces that independently harmonize with one another is the way going forward. And there's, it's simple to say, it's definitely not easy to do. Another awesome thing that was a legacy of our awesome consultants, who I'm still not going to name even though I'd love to. Lower environment management is an amazing place to save money. They built our lower environments, non-prod, test, and dev. They matched prod in scale and functionality. Well, your dev environment needs to match the functionality of a dev environment. Your non-prod needs to match the functionality but not the scale. Your performance environment is where you do scale up because you're going to beat the heck out of your code and load test it or try to break it through pushing a tremendous amount of volume through it. So we did all kind of things to work on our lower environment and drop our costs. Not only for our operational data stores I mentioned before, it's done in IO1 with provisioned IOPS. In our non-prod environment, it was IO1 with provisioned IOPS. In our pre-prod environment, it was IO1 with provisioned IOPS. And you're looking at maxing out at about 19 cents a gig a month when you're using provisioned IOPS. The IO1 is 10 cents, and then or 12.5 cents, and then the provisioned IOPS, I think, is 6.5 cents. So you're talking about a tremendous amount of money. Let's look at GP2, ST1, SC1 in the lower environments, because we need equivalent functionality. We do not need equivalent performance, except in the performance test environment. That's the only place. And so we went through a series of projects to scale down in the lower environments because that was the right thing to do. We operate in India, in Northern Ireland, here in Chicago, Charlotte, and Dallas in our Amazon infrastructure. So what time are everybody at work, and what's that window when nobody's at work? So there is a 4-hour window in there. So in the lower environments, and again, those of you who started in this cloud environment, oh yeah, you just shut it off when you don't need it. Well, nobody knew when to shut it off. So we did the analysis, we worked with the various teams in all the locations. Here's what our plans, here's what we'd like you to live into. We're gonna shut them down 4 hours blocks overnight, and we're going to shut them down on the weekends. And again, the weekend in India, I believe, is 10.5 hours offset from here, and then Ireland is 5 hours the other way. So you have to figure all that out. And so now in the lower environments, we're turning off the lights when nobody's home. And it may sound simple, but again, considering where we came from, it's another step in the journey. And then we did a deep dive into snapshots. And when I said before scale happens, when somebody makes an oops, that oops gets really, really big, really, really fast. So one weekend, somebody promoted the wrong code, and it turned back on snapshots to the tune of $15,000 a day. And we caught it $39,000 later. It's the benefit of having a Fortune 100 company stand behind us who can pay those bills with no problem, but nonetheless, how are you detecting those things when somebody sets off a glue job, chunking through data at $5 a gig, an Athena job at $5 a gig? At the type and volume of data that we operate on, we're in the petabyte range now, and in a couple of years we'll be in the exabyte range because we chunk through a tremendous amount of data every single day. That scale happens. And you got to prevent those things that are with the oops. So use your CloudWatch. It's worth the expense. It pays for itself if you catch one event that shouldn't have happened. This is our non-prod environment. And you can see we didn't have tags. Our first iteration of tags is the various colors that you see on the board. And actually, we turned them off because we're putting in the new iteration of tags here. That should go in first week of July. But we were running at a pace of $8,000 a day and drove that down to $4,000. It was about $10,000 or $11,000 a day in the prior year. I only am showing you year to date. So you can see the Hadoop, which is kind of in that teal color, and the Cassandra in the yellow. where we went from equivalent size of non-prod and pre-prod that matched prod, and we shrank it down. We got rid of 4 of the 5 Hadoop clusters in the lower environments. We shrank down the Cassandra number of nodes and the data provisioned in the elastic block storage for both Hadoop and Cassandra, because you don't need the petabytes that we have provisioned in production down in the lower environments. Nobody had looked at that before. And actually, if you look closer toward the right-hand side of the color portion, you'll see 5 lines, 2 down. You can pick off the weekends. You can see when things shut down in the lower environments. It's still not good enough for me, but it's a step in the right direction. And we'll, on future turns of the crank, we will go through and we will make that much more efficient in the lower environments, because that is your best opportunity, again, to save cost. EC2 hours. We're spending 10 Gs a day on EC2. We've driven that down to about $8,000 a day. And you can see, again, the loads are pretty common because a lot of our data storage and a lot of our intake systems are up 724, 365 because people drive 724, 365. But we are buying more EC2. We're paying the same price we did in Q3 of 2018, and we're using 2.5 times the EC2. Because I didn't include the prior year, but there was a lot of fixing, a lot of you can see a little bit when the purple turns to the colors when we did some CRI purchases and the costs are coming down. You can see a spike with the multiple colors tipped off in the red. There's 3 of them. That's an oops. That somebody spun up something in production they didn't. And it lets us ask questions, because we check this every day very religiously. And then we go and we ask the questions of the developers. We don't go to shoot and hunt the developers down or the DevOps people or anybody. We go to ask questions. And when you build that rapport with them, when you're asking questions, they're not hiding from you. They're not giving you cagey and evasive answers. It's like, okay, we made a mistake. Let's figure out what it is. And what can we do to make it not happen again? End of conversation. If you go in there with the heavy hammer and if you go in there hunting for heads, you'll get that done a couple, 2, 3 times, and then you have a reputation. Mike's walking down the hall, oh shit, hide. And he's coming to give bad news. The opposite side, when somebody does something good, we have a daily stand-up with engineering. I call those people out. This person, this team ran this project and they saved us this much. Here's how much it is on a connection basis, because that's represented in fractions of a cent. And then I roll that out to an annual savings amount that is tens, hundreds of thousands, and we've had a couple that have saved us $1 million a year. So everybody's, again, keep that scale in mind, from the pennies in the pocket change to what the annualized cost is, because if you don't teach everybody about the scale, they're just never going to get they're never going to get it. The stuff we're doing now, excuse me, our awesome consultants put everything on Red Hat because, excuse me, Red Hat is safe. Red Hat is a 6 cent an hour premium up to a 15 cent an hour premium on your EC2. So I give the example up there, it's 677%. So when you're going to talk to your engineers or your finance folks and you say it's 1.04 cent if I do it on Ubuntu and it's 7.04 cents if I do it on Red Hat, that's pocket change. That doesn't resonate. When I say you can lower your cost by almost 7x, or take it down by a factor of 7, that resonates with people. So find the language that's going to work and speak to your audience, because nobody cares about pennies and nickels. But we spend on a premium for Red Hat over Ubuntu nearly 50 Gs a month with no benefit. That's one of my projects I've got lined up for Q3 starts in a week. That project starts right after the 4th of July holiday. Another thing that when you use Red Hat, you cannot use Spot. Testing also rolls up to me as a part of engineering operations. I want testing to be 100% in Spot, because if you get your Spot called away, which is still a low probability, it's a test. Rerun the darn script. It doesn't matter. There's not a lot of cost in or heartache or dealing with the actual functioning of your operations if you have to rerun a test 2 or 3 times. But we can't do that because most of our instances are on Red Hat. It's 80% of our EC2 cost and only 45% of our hours. And so what did we do? For the licensed technologies that we have, we went and we brought all the vendors in and we talked to them one at a time and said, can we take your stuff off of Red Hat and put it on Ubuntu or CentOS or one of the other operating systems that you can put on your AIM or AMI. I always get that backwards. And work with them and work with your vendors. You now have to, going forward, if you want Red Hat, there may be a good case for it. Make the technical case that you need to have it, or if it's a part of your support agreement with your vendor, then you've got a good business case for it. But otherwise, you're using Ubuntu, and that's kind of an edict we put forth. Another thing is, whenever possible, move to that latest generation of EC2. The biggest change in the most recent iterations of upgrades by Amazon, going from an i2 2X, which we use, to an i3 2X, which is more powerful, it's 63% less. That's how I cost justify to finance why I want to give up the savings on a CRI over an RI, because I can buy some of those nickels and percentages back through upgrading. Yeah, if you go from an M4 large to an M5 large, it's maybe a 0.6, 0.7% savings on an hourly basis. No big deal. But there are instances that we use where the savings is quite substantial. Having those CRIs instead of RIs, you get to buy into that. And plus with the conversion rates and the equalization of the units and whatnot, you can usually turn that into a one for more than one when you do your exchange, which is really, really nice. We're right-sizing our elastic block storage because we came from a fixed environment where you put a requisition in for however many terabytes or petabytes of disk, and that's what you got. And whether you used 1 byte or 99% load on the darn thing, your cost didn't change. So another program we're putting in is, I need the technology stacks to give me a safety margin. If you need 20% more, if you need to provision 10 terabytes, and when it gets to 8, you can provision more. If you need a 20% headroom, there are scripts. Amazon has on their Git some awesome scripts that you can use to automate that. And you can change your EBS every 6 hours. So don't let anybody tell you you're locked in. You just have to have a good monitoring plan and really study what your overheads need to be between what your safety margins are. So we actually double it up. If it's a 10% safety margin, we give them 20, and the warnings start when you breach through having less than 20% overhead, and you have between 20 and 10 to get it to go, because right now it's done manually. We're going to automate all that so we don't have to worry about that, and it's going to be checked. The Lambda will wake up. Yep, that's one of those times we will use a Lambda because it's a perfect use case for it. It's a simple function. It runs quick. Up it and make sure you're always keeping your overheads. And as we learn more, we'll tighten up what that overhead's going to be. We'll bring it from 20 down to whatever's best fit for our organization. The next turns of the crank. We want to, even though we're a little division inside the big Allstate organization, we want to help the other folks learn from what we're doing, because in the Allstate space, in many instances, we're leading the pack as it relates to the cloud journey. So we want to make sure that we share the wealth and the love with everyone else and get everybody on board, that it's a good thing to do, and it's got awesome benefits if you use it smart and you use it wisely. I can't say it enough. Get your tagging down. Really work with the audience who needs to understand, who are going to be consumers of those tags. Your DevOps teams, your engineers in general, so they can figure out who's doing what, and your accounting folks. And then we've got corporate security and other things that we have to have tags in that allow them to do and support the functions that they need to do at a corporate level. Make the engineers prove things. And a good engineer loves science, and they like to be data-driven. Typically, I can put up a C512X. Well, it's running at 5% on average, and it's peaking at 9%. Why do you need a C512X? Make them prove. Reward making it as small as possible, but no smaller. And that's no simple feat, because You don't want production to crash because you undersize something or under-provision something. But make the engineers work through it. Make them demonstrate, why do you need IO1 when GP2 is a fraction of the cost? Have you run performance tests against IO1 and GP2? Show me why, what is the technical case behind that? And having spent time as a dev and all that, I can wade through the BS and talk to them in their own language. It's like, test it, make it work both ways, and which one's going to be better. Because before, they never had to work, they only worried about performance, meeting their SLAs, and does it work. Cost was never in their equation. And make that a part of it. And for goodness, sit down with your finance team, give them the hand-holding and love and attention they want and need, because the more they understand, the easier it is for us to be flexible in how we operate our cloud architecture. Again, by the end of the year, all of our testing will be done on spots because we're getting rid of Red Hat wherever possible. And then future turns of the crank, we want to ID production workloads that can go into spot and lower our cost. Auto-scaling groups, we don't use any of it right now because we're not far enough along in breaking down these monolithic structures inside of our systems to do auto-scaling. We would ramp up big giant things horizontally and just blow our costs out of the water. We've got to break these big giant containers or units down, because containers now mean something different. These big units of work down into small units of work, and then horizontally scale the right stuff. And then lastly, we're going to be making a move toward containers. Some things that are not Amazon specific related, but just general business related. We take in, let's see, last night I got a text about a half an hour ago. Last night we ran scoring models against 101.5 billion miles of driving. And we've only been at this a little while. So our data is long tail and our data costs are long tail. Have a hot, warm, and cold data strategy. You can see the scale from IO1 to Deep Archive. You're talking 10 cents a gig a month down to 99/100,000ths of a penny, or $1 a terabyte a month. And as the next speaker is going to talk about, because he's going to go into some of the details about storage and storage strategies, there are a lot of landmines in Glacier. There are a lot of landmines when you use some of the measured meter services inside of your regular S3. There are restrictions on all kinds of things, and you need to account for it. So you need to talk to the consumers of the data, how long or how are you going to use that data, and how frequently you need to access it. And I'm going to save part of that for the next speaker, because he's going to dive into it a lot deeper and with a lot more background than I could provide. Again, data footprint management. A GPS point that comes off your phone, it's 2 significant digits to the left of the decimal point. The decimal point itself, because it is a character and it takes up space, 15 to the right. And that's your latitude. Your longitude is exactly the same, except it may have a negative sign leading. So you're talking about 15, 16, 17, 18 or 19 digits. So we asked data science, if in the 15th least significant digit to the right of the decimal point, if it changes 1 unit, what does that mean? How far did my car travel? The answer came back in angstroms, which is, less than the width of a hair. That's got no practical business value. We're truncating that down to 7 digits because at 7 digits, our models still work. We can measure behavior, and it's meaningful behavior. In this case, this behavior is movement of the vehicle. I costed it out. So we look at it, since we have a long tail cost and we're going to keep some of this data up to 10 years. We get about a lifetime value savings for each byte we pull out of the data packets that come to us. We get about a $2,000 lifetime savings for each byte at our scale, because scale happens. And that's a whole track of work we're doing, and we're doing it very methodically because insurance, because we do have pay-by-mile programs, and you have to be very precise on measuring distance. So we run everything through with the data scientists and the actuaries, and they make sure that we're not going to adversely impact any of our users in any way possible. And then, why containers and why cloud agnostic? I want to flip the tables down the road and build cloud agnostic containers and then make an API call to Google, Amazon, and Azure and say, who can run this container for me cheaper, you get the work. That is the end of the rainbow for us. Now, cloud agnostic containers, that's no simple feat. So we're going to figure out what we can have standard across all the packages and what has to be idiosyncratic to the various providers, and then broker out the work. Then, yeah, I'm competing on price. Amazon's kind of got a thing for doing that in the retail side, so, back at you. And that's how we're going to save money down the long road. An example, I can't give you our dollars per connection, but if we normalize June of 2018 to 1, we are now, down a factor of 11 from what we were in June. Our EC2 hours, our cost per EC2 hour, we've taken from almost 45 cents down to a quarter. I still think I can get that under 20 cents, and that's my goal by the end of the year. And then you can see our long tail is in storage because we love data, and if you've ever met an actuary, they never want to destroy a piece of data since the beginning of time. They want to figure out how Fred Flintstone drove up until, So you can see that the storage as a percentage of the cost, of the total cost, is going that way. And then our EC2 cost per connection, because we normalize it and we present everything on a per connection basis. So we've had some months where it's gone up, but the goal is, again, to drive it down and to get everybody, make it cost manageable, explain the cost, understand the drivers, talk to your architects, and talk to your finance folks. Now, the nice thing is I'm part of a group called the FinOps Foundation. It's cloud agnostic. Right now, it doesn't cost anything. They meet every other week. There's about 300 people nationwide who are a part of this. I highly recommend it. It's an awesome group of people. They just talk about how do we work and play in the cloud and manage the cost side of it. So everything is through that cost lens. If that is of interest to you, I highly recommend it. Amazon's YouTube channel, every reInvent lecture, every local summit, it's all recorded, it's all available. There is some awesome information inside that. Drop me a note. I'm happy to help out. This is a community. We work together and we win together, and I'm happy to be a sounding board for anybody at any time. A little bit more about the FinOps Foundation, and this is the slide that these guys gave me. Again, it's cloud agnostic. It's not vendor specific. And then lastly, they are going to have a conference that just deals with cloud cost management, regardless if you're Azure or Google, whatnot. It's called CloudEcon. They're coming out with a book this fall that is, again, cloud agnostic cloud management. So look for it from your favorite place you get O'Reilly books. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate being here.